Should have done it at the table.
All right, looks like everyone is almost back. We'll get started shortly. All right, so this morning we are joined by Dr. Brittney Lewis. I hope that the intro breakouts were good and that folks had time to connect with each other. But I'll be introducing our speaker for the morning, Dr. Brittney Lewis. Dr. Brittney Lewis is a well-respected, community-engaged qualitative scholar, thought leader, author, and professor, known for bringing those most often locked out of local decision-making processes to the action research table for over 10 years. Dr. Lewis is the CEO and founder of Research in Action, an urban research, strategy, coaching, and engagement firm, and is currently a senior research associate at the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Formerly, Dr. Lewis was a Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank scholar in residence and visiting assistant professor at Macalester College in political science and American studies. Dr. Lewis wrote the state of Minnesota's first report on Black women's economics in partnership with the Black Women's Wealth Alliance. Dr. Lewis was the principal investigator of the illusion of choice, evictions and profit in North Minneapolis, and searching for stability, futility, choice, and access in Minneapolis Public Housing Authority's Housing Choice Voucher Program reports, and the co-principal investigator on the recently published report entitled The Diversity of Gentrification, Multiple Forms of Gentrification in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Dr. Lewis's research was used in a Minnesota Supreme Court to expand rights for tenants facing evictions as direct testimony at the Minnesota State Legislature, and to inform the Human Services and Public Safety Impact Agenda within Hennepin County, helping to get rid of the self-pay policy and the city of Minneapolis as they created their Renters Protection Ordinance. Dr. Lewis's continued work as a well-respected, community-engaged action researcher has led to her appointment on the Metropolitan Council Livable Communities Advisory Committee, the City of Minneapolis Housing Advisory Council, and the State of Minnesota Working Group on Police Deadly Force Encounters. Dr. Lewis was sought out as a board member for the Minnesota Legal Rights Center and the Minnesota Housing Partnership, and her expertise was featured in documentaries such as The Jim Crow of the North, 2019, and A Fiery Unrest, Why Plymouth Avenue Burned, 2019. Lastly, in 2020, Dr. Lewis was honored with a Bush Foundation Fellowship Award, became a History Makers at Home Award by the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department, and named one of the top 100 plus leading Black women by the Minnesota Black Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Dr. Brittney Lewis. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. It is an honor to connect with you all. I'm really excited to hear more about some of your work, and I hope there is some time for that today. However, I have a lot I want to share and also process with you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint I want to go through, but there'll be points in my presentation where I want to pause and reflect. And this is actually an invitation for you to take like pen to pad, because I think it's going to be more constructive for us at the end to actually kind of engage in dialogue. But I want to make sure you have moments to reflect, because I'll be sharing a lot. So that's just kind of a heads up. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, everyone see the screen? And now I'm gonna put it in presentation mode. Why not letting? Shoot. Where is the presentation mode? Listen. Mhm.
I think it might be slideshow, under slideshow,
And this slideshow, okay.
and then should be way to start. Yep.
I guess maybe. Everyone can see the screen?
Maybe not this one, but I think it says
Mm.
start. There was one that said play from start. Maybe that. Yep.
All right, perfect. So how I wanted to start today was really explain to you like who I was and why I chose action research and housing. Because when I think about the politics of the work that you all are doing as a cohort, a lot of this work is grounded in our values and our ability to be really clear about what they are. So if I were to answer the question, who am I and why did I choose action research and housing? I think something that's really important for me to say is that I'd argue that choosing data as a language of change was probably one amongst the most radical things that I could choose to do myself as a Black woman. And for me, I call that a radical pursuit because there's power in defining research questions and controlling the production of knowledge, particularly in a nation that continues to delegitimize the knowledge of Black people and Black women in particular. Um, and for me, the normative like research process validates a traditionally trained scholar to know more about a subject matter than the folks that actually experience it. So that means they independently produce questions, develop hypotheses, so to speak. They kind of parachute into community to extract data or information, and they kind of catapult out and make meaning of that data separate from the people themselves. So for me, I also want to make it clear to you that I'm deeply aware, as I'm sure you are, of the history that Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities have with research as a very violent and exploitative practice that is continually used to control, validate exclusionary practices, or create new paternalistic policies that say, I know more about your life than you do, and just enforce harm. And I'd argue that every single company, organization, government entity is using data to inform its decision. But most often, those most impacted are never at the table to co-design those goals and lead that work. So that's deeply invested for me in my values, like why I chose that as my medium for change. I would argue that an artist that chooses a paintbrush chose a different medium to get to the same form of transformation and perhaps develop practices or strategies in a collaborative way to get there. As it relates to housing in particular, I feel like at the origins, if I were going to be honest, I didn't choose housing. Um, the Black women that I was organizing with chose housing. So when I was trying to make sense of who I wanted to be as an engaged scholar, it was important to me that I allowed the people I loved the most to tell me who they needed me to be. So when I chose the pursuit of like going to grad school, doing the PhD, all of that, I had no predetermined need to be in a certain subject matter. My need or desire was to serve and work with Black women and girls. And they were going to tell me what they needed from me. And that's why most of my work has lived in the space of housing. And as I'm sure you all are fully aware, when you think about the history of like urban politics, urban renewal, urban redevelopment, Black women are framed as objects for study, single mothers, welfare queens, drug addicts, other stereotypes abound that make them at best victims, but at worst, the sources of urban decay. And that was a narrative that I wanted to adamantly push back on. because I argue that Black women and girls are actually the ones on the ground resisting paternalistic policies and whether it's developments and practices that actually tell them what they need versus listen to what they say. And I hope that throughout my presentation, you all are thinking deeply about why you chose the work you chose, and how you allow your connection or love to the community that you are in to guide that work. But I thought that was really important for me to share, because when I think at the bedrock of what cooperative work is all about, it's about mutuality. It's about placing leadership where it needs to be in the hands of experts, those most impacted by both the setting, the context, and what we're here to produce. And that's super important to everything we do in our work. So I want to share with you, so outside of what I do myself, I own Research in Action, which was introduced to you. It's a picture of my team. We are deeply, deeply committed to reclaiming the power of research for Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. We believe deeply in the reciprocity of our work and redistribution of power, and we do that in our actual practices. So when we go through some case studies, I actually explain how that works and what that looks like. So just a little bit about who we are. Absolutely love this group of folks and the work we're all kind of deeply committed to. What I'm hoping we can do, get to know me a bit and Research in Action, but also explore 2 case studies. I would argue that every project that I have worked on, the model under which we work is a cooperative model. However, the context under which we are engaging with community to move a racial justice issue always has the same conventions. The reality is we live in an exploitative capitalist system that is not meeting the needs of Black and Brown folks. And when we are partnering with whether it's local organizations, governments, et cetera, we create a new table where folks are willing to both name the negative impacts that this historical approach and continued exploitation has, and that we're all committed for the strategic moment to pull a brick off the broader wall. So in a kind of concrete example, the prison industrial complex is a wall. We are here to take off a brick, because the reality is many of the structures that we aim or desire to deconstruct would require us all to be committed to taking off a brick with deep intention to move beyond acknowledgement to reparative action strategies. So I'll explore 2 case studies with you, like how we did that, what we found, but then there'll be these pauses where I'll ask you all to go to pen to pad to reflect on what cooperative models we would utilize and why. I would also argue every project that I have worked on, the communities who are most impacted are already practicing cooperative living out of necessity. And that will show up, and I'll explain when it comes up in the work. So what defines Research in Action, or what we do? I've mentioned a few of these already. Actionable research for us means it doesn't just sit on a journal repository so folks can pontificate about the problem or mesmerize the problem, but that it is a process that is designed to identify concrete solutions that folks can move and stand behind at the state, county, and federal level. And we have done that with every single project that I've been a part of. But you have to actually start with that intention and build new tables. And part of that work is ensuring that we make an assessment before we start a project of what happened before we got here, who was harmed, who were at former tables, and who needs to be brought back, if we can. You can't force anyone to do anything. So it's always a community-led process. And the notion of who's most impacted is very much defined by the strategic moment that brought us together. So for instance, we have a project right now. It's the bail reform project. We're working with Ramsey County, and we are trying to change the bail system. We have the county sheriffs and other folks at the table committed to moving this work. It's not easy work, let me tell you. However, when we're imagining who is most impacted, it's really easy to pull what we call quantitative data to see who's sitting in jail. That's easy. We can see their racial demographics, their age, we can see how long they're sitting in jail, we can see for what crimes they're sitting in jail. And we use that data on the front of a project to say who needs to sit in these seats. So when we say who's most impacted, we are directly saying we need to ensure, and good, bad, or indifferent, that we're seeing clear disparities with young Black men, single mothers, age ranges, crimes. We're strategically identifying who we want to make sure sit in the seat. Racial justice, we don't ever use the phrase racial equity or any other, what I feel like is a very dismissive way to talk about reparative approaches. That's just our personal values and approach at Research in Action. We don't believe that we are invested in acknowledgement. We want to go far beyond that. I'm talking specifically about racial justice, which is about the politics of having to name historic harm. But then we have to move beyond that to get collective consensus on what we're trying to literally change together and how we reparatively do that with the community themselves, not to them, because that's not going to work. I put this image up here, artwork by a local artist here in the Twin Cities, made for the disability justice movement. It's really important for us that we recognize nobody likes anything being done to them, as I've kind of articulated briefly. Nothing about us without us is for us. It is huge in our model. We are, in every step of our process, showing other folks what that looks like. And I mentioned some of this earlier when I talked about why I chose research, why I came to housing. So we want to resist this transactional relationship that traditional research provides. We want it to be reciprocal, right? Reciprocal means we have mutual benefits in coming to the table, and we're naming our interests in a clear way. And that having interest isn't actually a bad thing, because we all have them. The problem is we're not naming them. We don't want to do this illusion of inclusion stuff. That's what we're used to. We want to talk about community leadership. Every table we create, community members have to outnumber folks with differential power. That is just like the standard. It won't happen unless they outnumber them. Then this like cursory engagement with like input. Input has been an engagement strategy that has been used to say that I came, but never be held accountable to how you interpret or what you do with what you learned. So we are very much committed to not just talking about input, but we only talk about solutions and action. And you have to use action-oriented language, I think, and model that work and what you do. This is just an image of what our 6-step model looks like. One, understand the history and current situation. This could mean there's been a bunch of data pulled already and nothing's happened, or community never saw it. That's also super common. Tables were created and a bunch of folks left. Why? Leadership created initiatives that went nowhere. Where's that leader? Are they even there anymore? We need to know all that to create the table. And when we bring the table together, as I noted, community have to outnumber folks with differential power, and we have to get really clear on this notion of shared language, values, and understanding. And you'll see this in the next case study I share, that the immediate breakdown in our work comes when we're not actually understanding each other, but talking past one another. So what's super important in our work when we build this new table is getting that clarity around shared language. So for instance, and this happened in the Missing and Murdered African-American Women Task Force that we recently led, we can't assume that everyone has the same definition of the word violence, for instance. And our experiences with violence, even beyond physical violence, influence how we understand the word. So in every project, there is this initial work that we help the group support with naming what's really hard about our different understandings of the context. We decide on then what's the gap in what we know or what we think we know, because the reality is there's already been reports done. Let's name that. But why didn't it do anything? We name that we now have a very clear shared definition of a problem and clarity on the part of the problem, meaning the wall and the brick we want to take off, because you can't do everything in one setting. And now we need to decide what gap we want to feel. What do we want to answer that isn't answered in what's already been written or said? And how do we want to redefine the conversation? We go out, we collect data in partnership with community. I think some of the most powerful projects I have done, because it is voluntary, it is not required, that the community members on the council go in community with us. We teach them focus groups skills, interview skills, like we will do it with them. What is really powerful about action research, if it's done right, is that half the work has nothing to do with the technical skills we bring. Half the work has to do with our ability to actually empower the community members at the table to lead the work. We teach them research skills, we help them understand how to use them, and we go out with them. And I argue that the outcomes of the project are much powerful. Also because when you have a community member who has lived that reality doing the interview, it's very different when someone else is doing it. So we come back after we've collected data together and we do what we call shared meaning making, and that's happening throughout the process. But we don't believe in us taking the data and just making sense of it without community. That makes no sense. So we will do the work of cleaning it, coding it, and summarizing it to make it more digestible. But then we bring it back and we have a series of sections where we work the working style to make sense of what is being said, how are they identifying a gap in a process, identifying a solution that we should all consider or invest in. And we do that together. And then we identify the solutions together as we are writing up the report. So what does it look like in practice? So there'll be 2 case studies I want to go through. And you will see in each step how what I described was perhaps taking place. But you'll also see they both have these either key intersections with housing or are all centered in housing. And you'll see how that shows up. So Research in Action was asked to lead the Missing and Murdered African American Women Task Force. As of December 15th, we actually handed in the legislative report. It was an amazing and yet eye-opening process for us all. It is the first of its kind in the country. Prior to this task force, there was the Missing and Indigenous Women's Task Force. But I'd argue with the approach we chose to take, I mean, our goal was also to set a precedent for how we want other states to engage in this work. So in 2021, the task force was developed by the state legislator to invest violence against women and girls. I would be preaching to the choir in this moment to say the ways in which Black women and girls have been erased from public discourse and or named or blamed for their circumstances is extremely problematic. And we really wanted to find a way with this action report to both name that history in concrete ways, but then provide concrete tools for moving beyond it. So the first thing that happened, which is super important to what the process ended up being, the reality is a state task force was never designed for community input. It just wasn't. Usually when a state task force is created, they appoint, meaning the department head, so in this case, the Department of Correction, appoints who they believe are the experts. There were maybe 2 or 3 Black women that were appointed to this task force. And they reached out to me prior to this happening, and they were like, we know you're the best person for this, tell us what to do. I said, well, first and foremost, I will never agree to lead a group that's supposed to be out Black women and girls, and there are a handful of them there. Okay, they were like, well, what do you want us to do? And I said, I will only agree if you allow us to create a group, an advisory council of Black women and girls, particularly girls who experience sex trafficking, who've lost loved ones as a result of violence, and they lead the task force. The task force doesn't lead them. That won't work. Okay, so they agreed apprehensively because we were the first state task force ever to do this, which blew my mind a little bit, but okay. So they allowed us to do what we said we wanted to do. And we created an advisory council. There are more women, but we didn't have everyone's photos. We had an amazing group of Black women and girls, some of whom have lost loved ones from murder, others who were trafficked themselves, and do a lot of amazing support work, in and across the community. Something else that's super important as well, unlike how they have approached the writing of these reports in the past, is we always use an asset-based frame and approach in our work. So in short, when we would actually be out in community, whether there's an intake form to actually confirm someone's participation, or the demographic form where we try to grab some baseline information for folks, or even how we design the interview question, we always started with what is amazing about who Black women and girls are. So there were questions in there about what brings Black women and girls joy. What are their self-care practices? What are the major contributions that they are making to their household? And you see here some of the things that Black women that participated in engaging with us wrote. Whereas the deficit frame, it showed up in some of the lit review. So the literature review gives the historic background of why does this matter? What has been happening to Black women and girls in housing, criminal justice, education, et cetera, whether you're talking about the adultification of Black girls, you're talking about sexual exploitation, being forced to the low-wage sector, like all that context happens in the lit review, but we don't lead with that. Because I'd argue that there is this deficit-based way we've already determined her to be a victim of her circumstance. And there's deep intention behind that in every one of our projects. When the council got together for the first time, to my notation before, shared values, shared language, and understanding was key. And let's also be clear, all of these women were carrying lots of trauma with them. So we had to get really clear on language, and language is triggering. So one of the first things that became really obvious in the beginning of this work, the desperate ways that folks were using the word violence, it was drastically different. So we had to pause and we had to go, okay, we need to come up with a collective definition of violence to guide how we're doing this work. And we did that, and it was amazing. But that definition helped us frame what the research questions were. And the group chose, so we look at the far left, it says, what institutions track and dehumanize Black women and girls and make them more susceptible to violence? And then to the right, what needs to change to ensure Black women and girls are treated with dignity and respect? So the group came up with these questions after first getting clear on their definition of violence. But then they also decided that the gap in research they wanted to fill, they argued that we could write a whole report on the lack of coverage of Black women and girls in the media, the lack of engagement that police officers take when actually Black girls are noted missing. Usually they say, statistics tell us that it's less likely that an Amber Alert will be sent out for a Black woman and girls because they just assume she's a runaway. This data is already there. So what the group wanted to do was go far beyond what's there, but to say what actual systems are tracking Black women to these violence circumstances. And I feel like sometimes when we come together for a strategic moment, we assume we know what people want to know or feel like is needed. And that's why this process is so important. So we did the study, did the outreach, and I want to highlight some key frames that came out of the research. To the left, you see a quote that says, "You have to be bleeding to be heard." And if I were going to be honest, this sentiment is very true across all of my projects, if I were going to be honest, from the evictions report to my work on Section 8 voucher holders. Black women and girls are always already talking about what they're experiencing when they're trying to or needing to ask for help. Whether it's how dehumanizing it is because of the language used when they go to, whether it's the agency, the church, or what have you, to try to seek that support. But then also what they feel like they have to prove about their victimhood to get it. And that was just huge throughout. And you can see quotes on the screen further kind of affirm this. I'm already broken. They want me to prove to them that my brokenness is worthy of their resources. And it's further traumatizing. I also talk about this runaround concept. The social service runaround was a concept that we coined in the evictions project and continues in other work, where when in the state of crisis, you now have taken on another part-time job, hopping from agency to agency, trying to prove X, figuring out who has what resources, et cetera. And this, both the time, the emotional, mental toll, but then how it impacts your ability to maintain housing when you have children. So these things, came up very commonly. But what came out of the work, and I wanted to highlight 3 recommendations that came out, but then the next one's about housing. One of the first things that was talked about was this hiring of people who care about and reflect community, particularly in domestic violence services. That was a huge space that we focused on, mostly because it was the shelter support that domestic violence services are supposed to provide Black women and girls under these violent contexts. And Black women and girls are very, very explicit about wanting these institutions or spaces to hire folks that look like them, but not just look like them, but actually have experienced what they've experienced. And I didn't know this before doing this project, but within the broader sex trafficking world and movement, there is contestation around hiring folks who have actually been trafficked. I did not know that was a debate. I didn't know that was a contention, but it is. And I was a bit shocked by it, as we are now working with the Safe Harbor Network and other folks who are saying that they have historically shied away from that, which really shocks me. Requiring training for professionals working in these fields. I also want to be really clear. These women were not talking about trauma-informed training. That's not what they were talking about. And I keep having to explain to folks what that means. And short, what they were talking about is what I would call self-awareness. So most of these institutions, particularly domestic violence spaces and shelters, are run by white women. And when the Black women and girls would talk about their experiences in very direct and honest ways, they would talk about how there could be 2 women, a white woman and a Black woman, both have histories of addiction. The white woman would get all these resources thrown at her and almost coddled. For the Black woman, again, she'd be treated like it is her fault. They should be police, test this, drug test that. In many ways, the Black women and girls are talking about the ways in which white women do not understand the ways in which their own racist assumptions were framing their lack of self-awareness around how they're mistreating these 2 women. This has nothing to do with trauma. I mean, the way in which we talk about trauma-informed approaches, this is very different. And we are trying to be very clear in the report about that. The other piece was around increased resources to support Black women and girls. Okay, what does this mean? And we write about it in depth in the report. So before we went out in community, we looked at what organizations here in Minnesota are geared towards supporting Black women and girls who are experiencing this violence, but then what organizations nationally are doing the same. And there was 2 or 3 things that were common. Almost all of them were run by a Black woman. And they're always run by a Black woman who had no money, okay? Meaning it's a Black woman who had her own website, who was tracking whether it's missing and murdered cases or making sure there's a resource page with all the domestic violence hotline places, or were creating their own support groups, all for free. This was super, super common. Even when we did interviews in shelters in like St. Cloud, for instance, there were Black women we were interviewing in the shelter who were creating their own groups because they didn't feel welcome in their groups. We talked a great deal in the report about this. The reality is our current institutions are not structured, prepared, or aware enough to do the things that Black women and girls are doing for themselves. And I don't know if it shocks anyone or not on the report on missing and murdered African American women that one of the major recommendation spaces were around emergency and long-term housing accessibility and affordability. It was a major theme in the report, and a major theme that there was never a point where we didn't hear about the intersection of violence and housing. So I think something that came up a great deal, obviously increasing access to short-term and permanent affordable housing options was urgently needed. Funding for Black or BIPOC specific shelters and emergency safe houses, eliminating prohibitory eligibility restrictions for existing shelters, going beyond the notion of a nuclear family. There's a lot of politics around this for Black women and girls about what is read as either a non-traditional family structure that is not being respected within our current institutions. Also spaces where older children or vulnerable family members of any gender can stay. There are a lot of examples where mothers are separated from their older sons or separated from vulnerable in their family because of how our institutions have named what family is or what is legitimate for family. So there's a big section in here about that. I want to have a pause and reflect moment, and this is just, 1 or 2 minutes to think about, and I would presume that in some of your work, some of the things I've shared might be part of the reason there's deep investment in wanting a cooperative model. But I asked, how could a cooperative housing model support Black women and girls who've been systemically trapped into violent circumstances? And just reflect on that. How could it? What would it look like? What would it feel like? How would it be designed and why? If the investment is about mutual benefit and support, what kind of supports do the women that I just talked about actually need? Some of these women have already started to create it themselves. But it's hard to sustain it, especially when you don't know where you're gonna sleep. So I'll give folks like a minute just to jot down what comes to mind. I'll give folks 30 more seconds. All right. So just to keep us on time, I want to move a little bit to the next case study. There'll be another pause and reflect, and then I would love to engage in some open dialogue with you all. So it was mentioned before about our former report on evictions, and I want to highlight some of this work, mostly because as I thought about the politics of cooperative thinking, and these I think about the women that are creating space and opportunities for them to live cooperatively in systems that aren't actually respecting or providing them with feeling human. Those are always already happening. And those came up for me in this experience with the evictions report. But then there are also contexts where I feel like we could learn perhaps what would be needed in a cooperative space. So the evictions report focused on 2 zip codes in Minneapolis. And the reality was we chose those 2 zip codes because if we look at the city as a whole, those 2 zip codes had a disproportionate number of evictions within them. So if you can see these 3 charts, although there's only 8% of all rental units in those zip codes, and only 22% of all landlords across the whole city, they had almost 50% of all the eviction filing across the entire city. That was quantitative data you just couldn't ignore. What's going on? So what we did is embarked on a project to figure out what's happening. And the first thing here to start off with is language. What is our shared understanding of what an eviction even is? Because I don't think everyone understood. So in many ways, it's an involuntary move that is a consequence of a landlord-generated change or threat of change in the conditions of occupancy of a housing unit. In fact, of the folks we interviewed, only 22% of the tenants had a writ of removal, and that in short means the sheriff actually came and asked them to leave. Only 22%. 29% were still living in the place that they were evicted from. And folks were like, what? How is that possible? Because I don't think most folks understand what an eviction is. We have this popular perception of it. And our report aims to really pull back, what is an eviction, really? Because most folks aren't actually being kicked out. And we'll get there. So in our study, there were 100 folks that we engaged with, 32 landlords. This is all voluntary. 69% were whites, 63% male, close to 60% had some college education. 84% of them lived outside of the 2 zip codes. 56% of the landlords, this was their primary source of income. When asked in a kind of demographic baseline survey, 94% were willing to accept Section 8, 78% managed their own. A majority of these men were managing it themselves. Close to 60% did their own repairs. meaning they didn't hire out professionals or what have you. 60% support expungement, 50% when they went to evictions court had an attorney, and about 30% had a budget, for eviction. So in the report, we broke down our investigative components of landlords into a series of sections. Motivations for becoming a landlord. Nearly half of those interviewed had become landlords in the past 10 years, and 1/3 became landlords during the housing crisis from 2007 to 2012. Many of them talked very openly about, yo, the market crashed and I could get a property for 80K, where if I bought in Burnsville, it'd be 180K. They were very direct about this. Also, what I thought was super interesting, a majority of these landlords were new, first-time folks that had never owned anything before in their life. I remember a quote, this guy said, "I would rent to anyone who could fog a mirror," was a quote that he used. The lack of inexperience was super obvious. Assessing risk and mitigating loss. There was a whole kind of theme that we pulled. So how did landlords assess that they were in a risky situation and they might need to make changes or enforce an eviction? And what would they do? And the most common themes that we found was, so cash for keys, which I thought was super interesting. I did not know this was a strategy, where the reality is, on the market side, it costs a landlord more to evict, the process of turnover, etc. So some landlords didn't want to go to court. They rather say, I'll give you, I don't know, I'll give you $100. You give me the keys today, or whatever. They will literally do this because in their mind, it saved them more in like court fees and attorneys. But it's also an informal form of eviction where someone who might already have a criminal background, has nowhere else to go, is also afraid of going to eviction court and might agree to anything. So mutual termination of lease by non-renewal, whether the lease is going to come up and they're telling you they're not renewing your lease. I don't know if that's very mutual, but they have the right to tell you that. Also, in a very similar vein, there were a number of tenants who are making what we call handshake and a smile deals that weren't on paper. This was very common. And then at any point, the landlord then can pull the rug from under you because that thing was never written down. And then the other landlord, the month to month. This was super common. I would say half, if not more, of the landlords in these zip codes do month to month leases. Whereas a tenant might say, oh, this gives me the ability to like move whenever I want to. It also gives him the ability to evict you at the drop of a dime. So if like they say the rent's due on the 1st, it's late on the 5th, technically based on your month to month, he'd kick you out. There's no redress for that. And many of the landlords who use this model had like a revolving door in their properties, where at the sign of any trouble or irritation. So for instance, many folks talked about repairs. Repairs were huge. I also remember going to properties where the windows were still boarded up, doors didn't even fully shut, where if they would complain about these things, they would just evict them. And when I'd ask tenants about this reality, they go, well, my option is go to shelter and either my family separated or I have to pay to stay. Or I deal with having a roof, even if it has boards up and the doors don't work. The notion of choice is an illusion. It's the choices made available to you. And it might sound illogical to some. And this is why we named the report the way we did, et cetera. There were 68 tenants that we interviewed, 61% were Black women. And just so you know, like the way we did it, in City of Minneapolis, the landlord database is public information. You can download it. There's thousands of names, addresses, and phone numbers. We did a random sample from the landlord list, and folks anonymously agreed. For the tenants, there were multiple strategies. We lived in housing court. So every week, the housing court dockets are published, and you're able to see if the person's being evicted from what zip code. So we would literally go to housing court every day. We had a relationship with the Minnesota legal aid attorneys. We also did some work tabling in North at local churches and other things like that. 61% were Black women, average age 44. 50% participated in the underground economy. We talked a bit about that, meaning how are you sustaining yourself? Because economically, folks were saying where they were at economically, whatever jobs they had were not enough to pay rent. And let's also be clear, people assume that living in these two zip codes, rent is cheap. No, it is not. Rent is not cheap. Especially for the area, etc. Let's see. So one of the things that we asked tenants was whether or not the home they were evicted from was their first choice in housing. And I think what's really interesting about this was 57% said it's not my first choice of housing, but 37% it was my only choice of housing. So even how you ask the question and how they interpret it matters. Because when someone would say, like, we would ask, like, if this was your first choice of housing, some people would be like, yeah, but then we'd ask a qualifying question and they would go, no, actually, I didn't have any other choice. So of course it's my first choice. And this matters a great deal because there is this popular perception around people choosing where they want. So they're choosing their own demise, so to speak. Many of the Black women I interviewed would talk about being uncomfortable when they walk through the property. But also it was the choices they had at the moment. And it was usually connected to whether it was shelter, sleep in a car, or in a home with a lot of other folks. I remember one woman talked about renting a room in a house where a bunch of folks live. Someone was always stealing, or the lock she put on the door was always getting broken into. And she had a child with her during all of this. So this notion of choice is an illusion. At the time of the interview, 71% of the families no longer live where they were evicted from, but 29% were in place. What does that mean? I know I mentioned this before about the term eviction. For many folks, they were receiving evictions and some multiple evictions from the same landlord. They would go to housing court. They would go before a judge. They would make some kind of agreement about catching up, paying, but the eviction is still on the record. And most tenants didn't know that actually when you were in front of a judge in housing court, you can in real time ask for an expungement if an agreement is made, but no one ever knows that. It's like it's hidden secret somehow. So then when a tenant learns this later, that you don't do it when you're sitting in court with the landlord, you have to pay a $300 or $400 fee to file for an expungement. So if you don't know that you can do that, which no one ever did, a tenant then goes, well, I made the agreement, I paid 3 months in, why is it on my record? They're like, well, that's not how it actually works. So they have an eviction and they still live in the place they were evicted from. And then stuff keeps happening, right? And then he evicts you again and you're back in housing court making another agreement. And most tenants would say, I would agree to things just so I wouldn't get kicked out, even if they couldn't do it. So I would argue there are some landlords who are also using this tactic knowing you can't leave. Like this cyclical process ensures you can't go nowhere. And we really wanted to break down like this power dynamic in this report because folks don't talk about eviction this way. Barriers to getting access, 62% the tenants said their identity, whether they're talking about their racial identity, having a Section 8 voucher, and their criminal background was huge barriers for them getting a place. I also didn't know of like this high exploitation of application fees. Folks were talking about how they're never getting these fees back. No one talks about this. Something else that was a theme that we made sure to talk a little bit about, 40% reported that they were receiving mental health supports during the time of this. No one talks about this. And another 10% said they should have been. I'm never gonna forget a story of a young woman who, after getting evicted, having to go to shelter and go through like the coordinated entry process with the county, they asked a number of questions for her that felt intrusive and somewhat demonizing. They asked her about addiction, and I think it was like the way the questions were asked. She said no to everything, although she was addicted to drugs, and she just explained this to me. She talked about the person that she was with at the time who actually introduced her to it. But then the way in which that conversation took place made her feel less than human, and also made her feel like if she said yes, that it was almost like this. The worker made her feel less than valued, like that she didn't deserve the resources. And these were really, really common stories. Something else that we did in the report is interrogating this non-payment of rent statistic. The reality is, when you're in housing court, the quickest way for a landlord to get you out is to click the non-payment of rent box. Clicking the what do you call this? For lack of a better term, the noise violation box isn't smart on the part of a landlord. Mostly because it's his word against yours, and police actively refuse to engage in housing court. Police will write a report but will not show up. They tend to try to stay out of it verbally. So it is in the landlord's best interest just to click non-payment of rent. However, the reality is, when we interview folks, it was actually not about rent some of the time. 22% of the time, it was about job loss, decreased income, or lack of resources. There's many accounts of landlord mismanagement and dispute. I remember following a series of cases where the landlord was actually misrepresenting how much rent was coming, and they caught him. 13% connected to domestic violence, health crisis, or death. Only 7% were simply not paying rent. It was much deeper than that. Of the 68 tenants interviewed, 21% reported cases that fall under the anti-retaliation provision of the Tenant Remedies Act. There is guidelines in the state that do protect tenants, but reality is no one's enforcing. And the truth is, the reason folks aren't enforcing them is because the fees are so small, it doesn't matter. So there are things in language to support tenants, but because of what it would cost to litigate it, it actually makes no sense. 10% of the folks we interviewed fall outside of this framework. Another framework that came up, there were a number of women I interviewed who talked about being sexually harassed and pursued by their landlord. And then after the report was released, I was asked to be an expert witness in a court case because a number of those women actually filed. And it was one of the landlords I interviewed. It was very alarming and disturbing to hear some of the things the landlord was doing. In very explicit terms, pursuing the tenant sexually in exchange for rent and other things. I want to end with a series of examples that get us to our pause and reflect moment. Here is a quote from a 65-year-old Black woman. "Not at that time, nope. At that time, depression set in. You know what I mean? And I started to have some mental health issues. I started using drugs just to kind of forget. You know, somebody introduced it to me. I had never done it before. And I think this is a time in which this tenant talked a great deal about being able to perform at work. It sounded like, I remember, her position at work got terminated amongst a number of other folks. Partly what caused her to go dive into deep depression. Another woman we interviewed was 38, said, "I was in a domestic. I still had post-traumatic stress. I was in a relationship for like 8 years. The whole 8 years was the most domestic. Now that I'm still looking over my back, and my mind wasn't where I was. Bills wasn't my main focus." There were a number of women that we interviewed who were in domestic violence situations, unable to kind of mentally and emotionally function. There was also another woman I remember where she would talk about trying to hide her rent money because when her partner would find it, he would take it. So it's also super important. Again, it's much deeper than the house. And the last story I will share is one I will never forget. I met this gentleman at housing court the day that he had checked himself out of the psych ward. And in short, he had told me that he had suffered from years of addiction. He finally got himself into a treatment program. He had graduated that treatment program. And this 6-year-old Black man said, I got my first apartment in my name ever. And that was a huge accomplishment for him. And he was so proud and talked very proudly about that space. However, you can only imagine the conditions of this space where the city of Minneapolis came, knocked on all the doors and said, you have 15 minutes to get out because this building's gonna get condemned. So presumably the landlords knew for months and months that there were a number of codes they were violating and had not brought the property up to code. And everyone was given 15 minutes to grab what they could and get out. And when I met this gentleman in the housing court, he said the first thing I wanted to do was have a drink. And I felt very suicidal. And I ended up checking myself in. And then I met him the next day. So again, housing goes far beyond the structure itself. And place and space matters, a great deal. Although my background is in urban housing and economic development, everything that I do is at the intersection of health, racial and gendered politics, and once neglected neighborhoods. So originally we're talking about 2 zip codes that show us there's a disproportionate number of folks being evicted despite only having 8% of the rental housing. And it appears to be the most affordable housing stock where young, economically mobile white folks buy it at the drop of the market because it's cheap. They fix things themselves. They don't really understand management. They're learning it as they go. While many folks, whether it is unlawful detainers, criminal background, history of addiction, or mental health, are often locked out of the traditional market and are forced to areas where a landlord will, as he said, rent anyone who can fog a mirror. 58% of those we interviewed had to move as a result of their eviction and became homeless. There were a number of interviews I did in people's cars. I'm never gonna forget one interview. Black woman, she had 2 children and 2 jobs. And finding a time to meet with her was unbelievably challenging. So then I said, okay, when do you take a break? I will meet you wherever. So I met her out somewhere in Plymouth in a parking lot at one of her jobs. I pulled up, had everything like ready to go. She got in the car. Her car was right next to my car. And she had this really big van. And if you look through the windows, you could see the van was full of stuff. And after we did the interview, she goes, and after I get off of work today, I'm gonna go pick up my kids and we're gonna go sleep in that van. Choice is deeply an illusion. And this woman was working 2 jobs, wasn't making enough. They'd afford the first month's rent, the down payment, the deposit, plus gas, light, clothes, and food. So her babies and her were sleeping in a car until she could raise that. And in her mind, going to the shelter made no sense, again, because she'd have to pay to stay. I'd also note that as of January 1st of, was it last year? we were able to successfully get rid of the pay to stay policy. I was been working with People Serving People, Street Voices for Change, and a number of other folks who've been advocating for this work in the shelters. We did a research study with shelter families. It is no longer, but we're still working on the county, not just now allowing folks to keep their money. We're trying to find some funders willing to match people's money where they can come up with first month they can match with the deposit. So we're still working on stuff like that. I feel like the last pause and reflect, and where I would love to just chat. How could a cooperative housing model support Black households who are recovering from trauma and addiction? This is big. It's never about the house or the literal structure, the doors, the windows, the stoop. It's about the things that make it hard to maintain that house. And I'm wondering, as you were thinking about your work and your projects, what cooperative supports, based on what you're hearing, would be helpful. I'll give folks a minute to just reflect or jot down. And then I want to open it up. And again, you can ask any question you want about either project I shared or things about projects I have not. But a pause, I think, would be helpful. All right, so as folks feel comfortable, I would invite folks to unmute and just jump in, whether it's reflections, comments, or questions. I would really love to hear what came up for you, whether it's during the presentation or in a reflective moment.
Hey, this is Kenna, and what's coming up for me is a lot of like just ideas and action steps, because I'm hearing like a lot of your experiences and stories and anecdotes and people's experiences via you and via the project. So like it's just a lot of information, and since I'm an action oriented person, I tend to like think of things I can do, but then I also am working on like figuring out how it intersects with what I do. So instead of like going off on a tangent of, oh, now I'm into housing, being like, oh, what are the ways that the cultural arts practices that I do and the like awareness raising spaces that I have, currency in, or maybe the people that I work with may be experiencing some of the stuff that you're talking about, like how can I be more mindful? So it's more so like reflection on the ways my actions can be impacted by the information you're sharing. And thank you for the vulnerability.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I invite others to, I don't presume that everyone's focus is housing. And if what I'm sharing helps you think differently about your practice and approach, I would also love to hear that.
Peace. My name is Sarita. Our commune, Lupine, one of the models that we want to create is respite for people who are experiencing what I call cascading traumas. Essentially what we're talking about, trauma after trauma after trauma. So I'm more in my feelings about about the presentation today than having action steps, because quite frankly, I think we're still in this place where we're trying to figure out how to actually execute that, how to have this short-term or long-term or determined by the individual experiencing the trauma respite, where people don't have to worry about their housing and food needs, where they don't have to choose between their healing and their housing. So I'm still, with the group, we're still trying to figure that out, but I'm emotional because yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, all of that, it's just got me shook to the notion of choice as an illusion. I in my space of going through a lot of what the presentation talked about, specifically as it relates to housing, I feel like the choices are curated. It's like, and so anyhow, I don't have any action steps, but I'm deeply grateful for the impact of this presentation, because I think it's reigniting and firing that up to try to figure out what those could be. So thank you. I'm done speaking.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate you sharing what you shared. I loved the thing you said about not having to choose between your healing and your housing. What I'm in my mind, I was imagining, ooh, what a rich conversation to have if it was framed that way. If you were to engage in community, I want to bring folks together to talk about what it would be like to not have to choose between the two. And what would they say? What would you learn? I think that would be very, very powerful. And then in this like action or solution space, again, my medium is connected to data and policy change. So I'm always walking into any context thinking about what actual practice within an institution is reproducing this harm, and what policy, and policy is just language that, whether it's the state, federal government, or institutions create, and language trickle down to people in departments. And people get to interpret what that language means. So half the time, there are actually policies to support I think, to change we seek, but it ends up being the supervisor or the department under the leadership they have that interprets it in a way that is paternalistic and violent. And I also think community are talking practice and policy, but they don't know it. Because when you're in this cascading traumatic reality, it's hard to think outside of that or to be able to realize that your actual experience is actually showing us where the process is breaking down and how it's breaking down, what it looks like, what it sounds like. It helps us identify, so out of the evictions project, there were 3 main recommendations that we guys pushed really hard. It was getting rid of self-pay. And I'll be honest, when we started that project, I had no idea at the scale at which folks were resisting going to shelter because of that policy. And then whether it was sleeping in their cars, and sleeping in the cars, having the cars broken into, like all the ripple effects of what feels like to some an illogical choice. So we made that something very important for us to move and change. And I'm glad that we were able to be a part of that. Something else that we supported after the report, a local funder put up $500,000 to redesign Hennepin County emergency assistance work. I've not gotten a major update on where that is at. But I think what's clear to me, it's growing in folks' awareness about the ways in which the distribution of these federal funds are exploiting and not providing the resource or the relief it's supposed to. I'm also trying to work with a number of funders to say, hey, don't just give out money without having accountability markers to it. Because the problem is, we're also learning that funders are giving money to whether it's the county or a particular nonprofit or what have you, and just believe they're doing what they're supposed to do, or believe the community's getting the resource. And we're finding that that's not always true. So I'm actually working with some funders who are willing to say, okay, what does that mean then? So if we put stipulations on our money, how does it work? So I'm also, when I think about actions that are, for me, within the medium under which I've chosen to lean into the world, I'm thinking about, so how can I use the data to change the narrative? Because that's what data is about at the end of the day. When you think about like the David Moynihan report that was produced in the 60s, it was actually supposed to be a report on why Black folks across the nation were struggling economically. And it ended up being a report that blamed single Black mothers for the reason that the household was deconstructed. That has a whole new life now, right? Everything from welfare policy, you name it, cites that report and goes, well, Black women are the reason why it's all falling apart. Data is controlling the narrative. And I think about my medium as a way to, how can I take the data I co-create with community and help folks change their behaviors? Foundation, county policy. How can I take that brick off? I'm with that medium. I'll pause if folks have other things they want to share, what comes up for them, what they're thinking.
Hi y'all. Thank you so much for talking with us, Dr. Lewis. I really appreciate you being here. And everything everyone has said so far has been very much so the things that are always on my mind when I think of these things, but it's such a big conversation. So I'm glad we're doing this here. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that this topic and conversation, while very needed amongst all of us, is probably really triggering for a lot of folks that are here too. And I'm sure plenty of us have experienced a lot of housing trauma, and the work being necessary is what it is. But I just want to invite everyone to take a deep breath and just really sit inside of our conversation today and take care of yourself while we talk about this, just as a healing moment. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you for sharing that, Mo. I definitely feel myself feeling heavy, so I'm trying to, like we said, when we started, in terms of like agreements, take care of yourself, be your own boo, all of that still into play. But thank you for being with us, Dr. Lewis. Yeah, this is a lot. It feels very heavy, but I really appreciate that we've been able to cultivate this space to share and feel what we need to feel. And yeah, I'm just trying to soothe the heart right now. So that's where I'm at. I'm always thinking about the body too, and how we hold these things, and tending to ourselves is important. So really appreciate this moment to just have our break soon, to really tend to ourselves and come back. But thank you again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm more than willing, if you so desire, for me to come back. It is a lot to process. And I'll be honest, what you just heard, I've spent 10 years doing and collecting. So it was a lot of years doing this work that you got in 30, 40 minutes. So heard and heard. I wish you all well in your pursuits, and let me know if I could help in any way in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. We're gonna head into a 40-minute break. Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, for being with us this morning. Yeah, that research is deep, dense, heard, needed, and yeah, definitely can feel the heaviness because it's tied to experience, humans, and all those things too. So, and also, yeah, just shared experience too for folks that are in the room, not knowing what people are bringing to the room too. So, yeah. So we're gonna head into a break, but the one thing I did want to mention is that just thinking about this work, with the ecosystem that is here, as you're all doing this cooperative work, I was just kind of seeing some lineages or some things that were lining up in terms of the themes that were happening. So while maybe you're not doing housing cooperative work, if it's cultural, like the ecosystems align, so some of those shared spaces so that's what I was seeing. So we're gonna take a break. We'll be joined by Mikeya from Rondo Community Land Trust after the break. So take some time, take breath, please relax, take care of yourself, and we'll be back. Hi everyone, welcome back. Well, if you are back, may you please give an emoji or put it in the chat to let us know. Okay, see some emojis. Thanks, y'all. Cool. All right, we're gonna go ahead and keep it moving. So for the second part of our today, we're joined by Mikeya Griffin from the Rondo Community Land Trust. So thank you so much, Mikeya, for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce you, read your bio, and then we'll give it over to you. I can't make Mikeya co-host. May you go ahead and do that, Liana? Thank you. So Mikeya Griffin became Executive Director of the Rondo Community Land Trust in fall 2021. In this role, she oversees all facets of the organization, setting strategic direction to effectively meet mission, grow impact, and realize a bold vision for the future. Prior to joining Rondo Community Land Trust, Mikeya served as an executive director for the Minnesota's largest homeowners association and only private city in the state of Minnesota. During her 5-year tenure, she successfully increased member participation and established strong governance and streamlined operations. Mikeya's career spans in the public and private and nonprofit sectors, including roles at HUD and Land Bank in the Twin Cities. Mikeya has more than 20 years of experience in organizational leadership, business development, affordable housing, and community development. In that time, she has created and championed many affordable housing and economic development initiatives centering BIPOC and low-wealth communities. Mikeya is an active community member, serving on the board of the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, shares in the Minnesota Community Land Trust Coalition, and volunteers at her local church mentoring youth. Mikeya was most recently appointed by Governor Walz to the Minnesota Higher Education Facilities Authority. Growing up in the historic Rondo community, her family instilled the values that are reflected in community, incredible strength, courage, and resiliency. These values have guided Mikeya's robust career and will serve as North Stars for her work at Rondo CLT. Mikeya and her spouse, Axel, both live in St. Paul with their dog, Max. When she's not working or engaged in volunteer activities, Mikeya loves to cook and build community by hosting large dinners for friends, family, and community members. You can also catch up with her singing karaoke with friends and bringing back her days of singing in several bands around the Twin Cities. Thank you so much for joining us. So excited to hear about your work, the work that Rondo CLCT is doing, definitely all about the cooperative and land trust work that's happening over there. So yeah,
awesome. Thank you. And gotta shorten that bio. Like, thank you for reading that long morning. Thanks. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I have a presentation. I'm not going to go through all of it, and please feel free to stop and ask questions as we move along. You just never know how much to say or not to say in these situations, because you don't know who knows about a land trust, what that looks like. So we'll get started here. I'm just going to try to share my screen if I have the ability to do that. All right. All right. Alrighty, folks, I'm gonna really try to do this. I am very technology challenged. All right, trying to get it into SlideShare. All right. Well, Rondo Community Land Trust, as you all know, I'm the executive director here, and I really consider myself to be a daughter of Rondo. The mission of Rondo is to strengthen and preserve communities by providing and advocating for permanently affordable, sustainable housing for families and individuals, to really promote the utilization of the land trust as a model and a method for preserving affordable housing and economic growth and neighborhood stabilization. We also pride ourselves on supporting and celebrating cultural diversity by providing affordable business opportunities to also help increase community economic wealth, property values, and jobs. I don't know how many of you are from this Minnesota area or if you know anything about St. Paul. The Rondo community is one of the largest Black communities in the city of St. Paul. And through the building of 94 and urban renewal, and we've been talking, I'm sure you all know about these things from the city of Minneapolis all over the United States. But in the Rondo community, over 700 homes were lost to I-94 construction. Over 300 businesses were lost to the construction. We have done some studies, or there's some studies that have been done that realize over $157 million of intergenerational wealth was lost through this economic violence of having the highway built directly through the Rondo community. One of the reasons why I really love doing and coming into this work at Rondo Community Land Trust is the shared economics, and that's how I grew up. And the Rondo community itself, before 94 came through, you know, they had grocery stores and civic civic clubs and doctors and lawyers and, you know, everything that the community needed to be self-sustaining, and they did that. And I grew up in that. Even through the economic violence, the community is still very resilient. We serve low to moderate income families and individuals. I'm not, you know, in terms of our housing work that we do. And then we also are, we're a residential land trust and a commercial land trust. So we pair both of those offerings together. And I think I might have pulled up the wrong slideshow, but that's okay. We're going to work through it. So we believe that this mechanism of the land trust model not only solves for the lack of affordability in homeownership and helping us close the racial homeownership gap, but we do it, and we do it for generations in our homeownership work. When we say permanently affordable, we mean that. And then the land trust really kind of removes the land from the for-profit speculative market and places it in shared equity. And that really is how we help guarantee that we have in our homeownership work perpetually affordable homeownership. We have programs that work primarily the same in our commercial work, but you know, it's how we kind of do it in our homeownership work. Rondo Community Land Trust was the first community land trust in the state of Minnesota. It was funded in 1993 when the community was really anxious and trying to find, the Rondo community itself was trying to find ways to preserve affordable housing as it was being gentrified at that time. So the community members got together, they did some research, and they wanted to come up, they agreed that the community land trust model was a model that they wanted to forward. So we've been around for the last 30 years. In 1995, we had our first homeowner come in. 10 years later, we expanded to all of the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County. In 2020, with our grand opening of our flagship commercial development, we also became the first commercial land trust in the state of Minnesota. I'm sorry. I'm the second executive director here at Rondo. And I want to talk a little bit about what a community land trust is. And I can stop if we've already gone through this. So let me know. Okay. And stop me if there are questions. Just pop up. Just take your mic off and just ask questions. So a community, I'd like to start with the fact that the community land trust model was really born out of the Black experience. When sharecroppers were getting kicked off their land during the civil rights movement for the right to vote, the first community land trust was started in New Albany, Georgia. It was called the New Communities Community Land Trust. And so again, it makes me really proud to be tied and connected to doing this work. There are over 200, there are actually over 300 community land trusts in the United States. And now, after Rondo being the first community land trust in the state of Minnesota, there are 13 community land trusts in the state of Minnesota. We are all governed. We all have different areas that we govern. And again, our area is the city of St. Paul and all of Ramsey County. We are officially kind of, we have a coalition and an association for the Minnesota Coalition of Community Land Trust. Most of the community land trust work that's being done around the United States and in Minnesota is really centered around homeownership. But we also believe that the community land trust model is a very robust, nimble tool that really can be flexed to a lot of different ways to support community. They are really designed to ensure long-lasting community ownership and stewardship of assets and land, create shared equity ownership opportunities that remain permanently affordable for generations of families. We also help balance the interest of a community's residents, the broader community, public interest, and we really, really focus on supporting community wealth building, retention of assets, and we believe that the community land trust model is a good solution for community needs. Again, when community came together and said we need new housing, we need affordable housing, you know, we tried to answer that call. And then when the community through our commercial work came and said we need we're being gentrified, we don't have lower income, or not lower income, lower affordable leasing for commercial or affordable commercial ownership. And so we've worked to help address those needs in the community. Because coming in and taking this work over, because I believe, and our board believes, that the Rondo CLT or the community land trust model is a really great, flexible, innovative tool. We are looking at how can we do that and stretch it to its limits to make sure that, to ensure that we hold space for generations. And you know, we're looking at capturing residential, commercial, urban, green space, rural, urban agricultural. It's really about the land, and then what can we put on top of it that either redresses or addresses community needs, or provides opportunities for community to buy into and to own. We support a variety of legal structures, including single proprietor and other shared ownership opportunities like cooperatives, whether that's a limited equity co-op, condos, cooperative investment trust. We do support all of those. And then we want to just do all that we can to facilitate ownership and rental opportunities. And on top of that, because a community land trust is, again, governed and owned by community members, we really want to continue to nurture the social and cultural connectivity and economic synergies aimed at growing community wealth. I'll stop there if there are any questions at all. All righty, I'm going to keep on going. So primarily, again, shared equity ownership is majority of what a lot of community land trusts do in the state of Minnesota and across the country. Primarily, a community land trust takes a one-time subsidy. So we get subsidies from our government friends, state, county, federal. We take a one-time subsidy and we make that permanently affordable. In the homeownership work, we really focus on homeowners that are 80% area median income and below. In turn for getting either affordability grants to pair with mortgages and or properties that we put on the market, if it's a new build or acquisition rehab. We put significant investment into it, and it really remains affordable for a person at 80% AMI and below. The first family buys the house at a price that's affordable to them. And they're able to, they would actually have an opportunity and market rate to own a home that's well below what the market is bearing. They agree to share in the equity. And right now it's 25% equity. And then that they share 75% of any equity that's gained out of a home goes back into the property, and the homeowner also agrees to sell it to another low to moderate income family. The first family is able to build wealth and then pays it forward. And that's how we get the house to stay sustainable. Other benefits are really provides a greater likelihood of someone being able to enter into the homeownership market. It does build wealth among lower income families of color. It ensures that our public investment goes further. It does build stronger and safer and higher quality neighborhoods and homes. We also provide, job opportunities for our construction, property management. It's a really awesome ecosystem. As I said, the traditional land trust model, a family or individual purchases a house. The land is owned in community ownership. The purchase price, of course, is more affordable, and the homeowners lease the land. There's a 99-year ground lease that just kind of explains and details all the things that we're responsible for and what they're responsible for, but everything acts and tastes and smells just like a regular home purchase. The homeowners, again, just agree to share and sell the home at a restricted price to keep it affordable into perpetuity. And then if they get back any investment, so should a person decide to sell their home, they get back any investment that they've put in, principal and interest, plus if there's any 100% of any of capital improvements that they put in into that, and they can take 25% of any of the equity. If most times homeowners are coming in with basically instant equity, you can refinance your home, pay off existing debt. You could decide you want to become a real estate baron and buy a couple of, take your 25% and buy a duplex, property, do all the things with that if you'd like. But in the end, if you decide to sell, you agree to share in 25% of the equity. Any questions about that? Awesome. I just want to stop here and talk about the stories of impact that this model could do. And we had a young woman who purchased a community land trust home. She saved money, she went back to school, she earned her PhD, and now she runs a Black-owned therapy practice out of our commercial development. She sold her home to another African-American woman, single mom. She's awesome. And her 25% actually allowed her to go into the regular real estate market. And so this is the impact of what the work could look like as we move forward in the work. We have several residential programs. I'm not going to get into all of that because I am not following the script that I was given here. So let me make sure that I do that. Rondo community itself has a couple of residential programs, and really it's about our homebuyer initiated program. It's about that's one of our biggest feeder programs. It really allows us to pair a substantial grant to someone who has a mortgage. For example, we had a young family. They only qualified for a $95,000 mortgage. We paired them with a $150,000 grant. They took their $95,000 and the $150,000 grant, looking, and was able to successfully purchase a home in the city of St. Paul. And again, we span all of St. Paul and Ramsey County. But those are ways that we can really help people have agency for themselves and find a property that works for them. We strategically do acquisition and rehab. So we acquire homes, put in subsidy, rehab it, put it back on the market at an affordable rate, and we do new construction. We also have a reparative framework model that really aims at righting wrongs in communities, much like the Rondo community experienced. And so we have a program called Right to Return to Rondo, where we are pairing significant investment through our homebuyer initiated program with those descendants of folks who were those 700 to 800 homes that were displaced. If you're a descendant or you have significant history in the Rondo community, we pair you with significant investment to come back to the community and live in it. And then in our commercial work, we have first right of refusal in the Rondo community in our commercial spaces. Or if we have land that we owned in the space, if we want to, build something new on top of it, it's first right of refusal for those business owners. We also are looking at how can we repair redlining, have reparations or reparative measures for redlining and racial covenants. The Ramsey County, there were some studies done by the University of Minnesota and along with the nonprofit called Mapping Prejudice, and they actually mapped racial covenants in Hennepin County and Ramsey County, and put redlining on top of racial covenants, where it literally says you cannot sell, lease to a Negro, Mexican, person of color. They had literally had those racial covenants, even though they were made federal government made those unconstitutional and against the law. So, but those deeds still have that language in it. So anyway, we are looking at how can we work with those homeowners that are ready to sell in areas that have racial covenants in them, and how can we pair folks with investment to actually live in a place or own homes where they were historically not allowed to do that. We do a lot of work to help people who are maybe experiencing foreclosure or tax forfeiture or have a lot of deferred maintenance on their homes. We want to keep people in their community and keep them in their neighborhood. Let's see, our commercial programs. So we have our HIP, which is our home buyer initiated program. We have something called BIP, which is our business initiated program. So if someone is looking for, wants to buy brick and mortar, we really try to work through how can we help a business do that. We do strategic acquisitions in communities, and we do new construction through our mixed use development. We preserve and redevelop properties, and we do mixed use and industrial. Some of the work that we also pride ourselves on doing here and think are important are to preserve those longstanding BIPOC business and frankly Black businesses that are in community that maybe there's not a transition or a succession plan. And we come in, we do things, in our economic development work, we are, for example, we are currently purchasing a longtime legacy business that has been in the community, serving it for over 40 years, but the children don't want to continue in that work. And so we're stepping in to ensure a few things. One, that the business doesn't get taken advantage of and in this kind of speculative investor market. So we want to make sure that there's a fair price for the business, and two, that we're then able to sustain legacy in the community. We're also working with another legacy business in the community where we're going to interim purchase, revamp the business model, and turn it into a worker cooperative. So this model just does quite a bit of things. And let's see, I'm going to leave it there. But I'm going to say one more thing and then we'll leave it there. Where we're going in our hopes and dreams for the work that that Rondo Community Land Trust is doing. We're going to grow our residential portfolio because we want to support more people in home ownership. We're going to expand our commercial land trust model to hopefully and continue to preserve locally owned businesses. We're going to implement other shared equity ownership models like housing and worker cooperatives. We want to really create vibrant economic nodes by facilitating intentional synergies. So with our SMV project, our mixed use development project, we actually have 34 units of senior housing above, and our seniors are working in a restaurant that's actually in one of our anchor tenants. And we have services and other things that are in that, and directly adjacent and near and around other community land trust houses. But the businesses and the homeowners are also able to take advantage of, because we've done this work, because we've been able to activate a corridor that otherwise was really being disenfranchised. Activating it, we actually have now more investment coming in from other businesses. So it's becoming a hub, and we're able to grow economics while we're also holding space for businesses in the community. And ultimately, we want to build people power. We really believe that collectively holding land, that it really is a powerful tool and mechanism for social and economic power for people of color and marginalized people. If we can assume and amass enough, then we're powerful together. All right, I've talked a lot. I'm going to not talk anymore. Questions? Stop sharing my screen for a moment. Anybody? Anybody? No? Can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you all are doing and some of the ways that you're I'm just kind of coming in to trying to understand what Nexus wants to accomplish through this cohort, and how maybe I can create some other context.
So is this question for me or for the fellows?
For you.
Yeah.
And then I have questions for the fellows.
Yeah, so for this cohort, so this is for the North Star Black Cooperative Fellowship. This is focused on like housing, land trust, land. Some folks are doing like work around arts. But yeah, we're just kind of like figuring out like what this work looks like long term in this work. So yeah, like you, yeah, and I'm kind of hoping that folks kind of jump off their mics and talk about the work that they're doing. Maybe that will give some more context.
Yeah.
As to what folks are doing. But I'll do that and then maybe ask my question.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, I just came here. Was there a question that was asked right before? Because I felt like you were saying anyone when I got in the room.
No, I just finished doing a PowerPoint, and I think just want to make sure that I can help continue to set context of how I believe the community land trust model can also pair so greatly and wonderful with other cooperative or shared ownership models. And just if anyone had questions about the work.
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My good friend Charles Bradley is that's like my Uncle Charles. That's my friend. So in the context of like Rondo community and like all of the differing opinions about how to go about getting reparations or making it better or whatever we're doing. Like, can you just talk about some of the actual, I mean, without like disclosing what you're not supposed to disclose, but some of the actual like negotiations between like folks that have an equal amount of like capital, if you will, or like people in community who both have the right to be saying what they're saying, but they disagree on how to use the resources. Or, you know, I'm just thinking about like people that are abolitionists versus people that are more trying to work on reform. So like you might both have been doing work in community. So it's not like you can say, you just came here, like you can't tell us what to do. You know, it's like both people have equal stake in the issue and an equal like currency about it. So I'm just curious because I know that there's been some contention in like how land gets used. So I'm wondering, like in the spirit of a collaboration, can you tell any stories or give any advice about what you've experienced around that?
I can, thank you. All right, so when I say community land trust, when we say community land trust, personally for me, it's community. It's supposed to be community owned, you know, like designed by community, those kinds of things. And there's some fair amount of work that I love that you love Uncle Charles, that I think Rondo Community Land Trust needs to be a little more front and center into. And, you know, we're building we are building relationships to ensure that community on both sides has a voice, and we need to figure out how we move forward. So I will say that, and we've been resourced to do some work that's going to be geared and centered mainly around this topic. And, our work in that role is to facilitate and to ensure that resources that come to the community, whether it's federal, state, local, those things, can really be distributed based on community voice and cooperation in that. So I think, it's real hard when people are, super passionate, and if you're in the community, you're part of the community, you've been raised in the community, you want to ensure that the community continues to have what it needs. And so I know I'm tap dancing around a lot of the questions and the issues, but I want to really be more focused on the fact that we plan and will continue to do this work in a collaborative to make sure that the community is designing what it needs and helping the community come together and say.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying, because what it brought out for me is like, it's not developers. So like if we're talking about a spectrum, like community and developers, people who want to make money. I just heard a story about people in Atlanta, like developers buying up the homes so that people can't buy a home. But they can rent a home from a company that has bought every home on this block that's even affordable. And then even the ways that it gets like stepped into like business. So like community, business, developers, like just different types of groups of stakeholders. So thank you for lifting that up. I appreciate you.
I'll be remiss to say this about the model that the community should be developing. We should, our goals for this work is for to ensure that community doesn't continue to be the consumer of its just being, that they have an opportunity to participate in, whether that's development, whether that's investing in the development, that we aren't just considered the consumer of and being kind of preyed upon from developers. So this really is about community coming together, and the community is the developer for the work that we will do here.
Okay, I don't want to keep monopolizing and going back and forth. I just want to bring the North Side example because I work with Martine Smaller at NERC, and we're in a situation right now where somebody wants to develop, quote unquote, some sort of, housing, the 63 units of this, that, and the third. And we from the community organization is kind of like, wait, can we get a cafe? Can we get a coffee shop? Can we get a flower shop? The funeral home is right there. Can we get a gift shop? Can we get some place for people to spend their money other than a liquor store? Can there be some sort of stipulation that your ground floor has to be away, like how Golden Time is? You know what I'm saying? So I just wanted to bring those examples.
That really is the joy and the work that we get to do as a community land trust, because where Golden Time is the building that was actually, the community said we need more affordable commercial development, and senior said we are getting pushed out and we need affordable senior housing, and we were able to provide that to the community. Well, the community was able to actually kind of provide it to itself. And so we want to elevate and amplify that work so that if you need a coffee shop, if you need a flower shop, a bakery, a grocery store, how do we come as a community land trust, and whether that's, working with a socially responsible developer, whether we develop it ourselves, whether we also let people of color who traditionally haven't been able to be like big time developers come in and do that. Our role really is to do all that we can to have community develop its community the way that they see it that they see that they want to have it done. Thank you.
I feel like land trusts, in a way, they've been talked about, not so much with like Arc of Justice Land Trust, because it was like organizers, as you said, but like now, it's like the nonprofits like holds this land trust. So as we like develop this work in the cohort, and if folks are like thinking about a land trust model, because it's like it's gonna take like multiple things to put together in this ecosystem if we're looking for something different. But like, are you seeing like cooperative groups or like collectives holding land trusts together, like outside of like a 501c3 per se?
I think that even with the New Albany, I mean, it's yes, and however, yes. And even though we're a 501c3, our board is a tripartite board. If it's members of the community we have to have members of the community, and we have to have actually people that own our leaseholders. So, and then we also have like 4 seats open for, our people, friends of the, people that we want to make sure that are, policy makers, those kinds of things. And so in a sense, and that is the way that I see the role that land trust should have. And so in a sense, you would be owning if you were to, even if you were a 501c3. And we're not 100% right now. A lot of our work, of course, centers in affordable home ownership and in that work, but in our commercial work or other places where, we can do a great community has an economic mix. And so we want to hold space where we can for affordability. But in those instances, when we have a developer of color who's going to come in and do some development, and they want to have mixed units or mixed rate units, that we're able to also provide provide that as well. So and you can pair community land trust with a cooperative. You can, so if the cooperative wants to own the building on top of the land, great. And even in those instances, it's who's ever part of that cooperative that is, but a community land trust really is about the land will still stay out of speculative use. It will also be used to make sure that whatever the community has said and, and its work that they want to see, that's also part of our, ground lease and things that are part of the land. And that when and if something goes wrong or whatever, maybe the building, whatever, that we're able to step back in and go back to the community and say, hey, this didn't work here, or we may need to make some changes. How do you guys want to see that? How do you want to see that happen? So it's kind of like double protection, double ways to do the work. I think I answered all the questions that you asked. I didn't want to overwhelm with like a 1 hour PowerPoint, but I am interested in what others are doing and what they're thinking. And I'm also always interested in perceptions of the community land trust model from others. know, I could keep talking, but I don't want to do that.
Hi there.
Hi.
I can share what we're doing. So we're part of, my sister and I, Sophia and Sarita, we're part of a group called Lupine. And we're interested in building a tiny house community in rural Minnesota with the aim of providing a space of respite for people who are going through trauma, where they can have their basic needs met for either short-term housing or long-term housing. And we're in like the very beginning stage. So it's really inspirational to hear you talk about how big the impact can be as you're expanding, but we're like at the very beginning. Like you talked about the first house you bought, we're like right before that. So I'm interested in hearing more about like, yeah, I guess like the start and really we're considering so many different models and ways of like purchasing, and we're still in those very beginning stages. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more to that.
Sure. So and are you interested in a community land trust model, or are you just interested in getting into the affordability game?
Potentially, yeah, a land trust is something that we're interested in. We're really interested in like removing it from speculative market and thinking about affordability long term.
Awesome. So there are, I will say this, and I'm not discouraging anybody at all, but there are 13 community land trusts in the state, and you know, I sit and I'm the president of the Minnesota Coalition of Community Land Trust, and I want to grow this model across the state as well. And I think we've got a really great established kind of following, and it's the working with the Minnesota Housing and Finance Agency, your philanthropic folks, you know, if you have city help or county help in your county, if they have dollars, that's where you're going to get your affordability from. I would encourage you, if there is not an established community land trust in your area, we do a lot of, we put on a conference, we do a lot of things. So I encourage you to come to those. We do in-depth kind of technical training on that. And I will say, and I've been here a year and a half, but I've done a lot of community and affordable development, and I've been in that world for a long time. The community land trust model itself is, you know, it's an evergreen organization, and there is, I mean, your earned revenue strategy has got to be, you got to figure out what, you know, what that might or might not be. And this model works best when it's at scale. And so that's one of the reasons why we are, you know, totally growing the model, growing all of our work. And again, encourage, if there is a community land trust in your area, what can you do to be on the board, to if that's, you know, if you want to connect with them, see how you can partner. It could be simple as you know, for us, we work with folks where we take land, make sure that land is in community hands, and then work on what's on top, what buildings, what homes, what, you know, townhouses, limited equity co-ops, whatever that is. And then the organization that forms around that is able to actually still do all the things that it needs to do, whether, you know, having your tiny houses, doing all the kind of supported behind the scenes work, also ensuring that the board or whatever that is on that the land trust is, that you're part of, is doing all the things that it needs to do in the communities. Because I will tell you, in this work, they got to do more, and I'm encouraging them to do that. But this becoming a community land trust is not easy at all, and it takes a lot of resources to do it and to sustain it. And because I didn't talk about kind of our supportive programming. So we do post-purchase stewardship, both, business technical assistance and homeownership assistance. And it's all about bringing community together. Again, we have annual meetings, we do family outings, we work with people on the individual level. What are your goals? What are your dreams? What do you want to do? We try to, meet and provide them with resources to do that. We don't want to just drop people in the vacuum. We want to ensure to the best of our ability that they can, that folks individually can sustain and grow in their lives. In our work, we only income qualify one time because we want people to come in and soar and sell if that's what they want to do and get into the regular market. And we're here to help. Yes.
Hi, I'm with a farm called Home. We are a cooperative of folks who focus on, I put it in the chat, focus on stewardship, land stewardship, and housing, specifically farming and maintaining a rhythm of just sustaining us and what that looks like, along with like what Sophia was saying. Sophia and Olivia were saying with Lupine, and everybody has all of these beautiful things going on where we're talking about respite from trauma and permanent housing and maintaining that. I'm curious about what a realistic timeline is for like land acquisition and then building on that land, and how you maintain, I guess, momentum around that portion of it. Because the reality is like, if we're all starting from, we're mainly conceptualizing right now what we want this thing to look like. But when we get it on the ground and when it starts moving, what is a realistic timeline to consider for land acquisition and building on that land as well?
Awesome. It is really going to depend on your financing, your ability to get the affordability gap. It's every development, even if it's just one single house that you're going to build, can take anywhere from 6 months to 5 years. It's all going to depend on how you stack your capital, how you stack your subsidy. Everybody's going to need subsidy. That's how we keep it affordable. I am so excited about this, you guys. I'm trying to okay, everybody just come over to Rondo Community Land Trust building, and we gonna map it out. And we're gonna connect you to how can we okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting all excited. It's like, how can I help accelerate the processes, right? If you're in St. Paul and Ramsey County, we're doing it. Come join us. Let us help. Because collectively together, I think, if we come together, we can push the boundaries and just get her done. And I will say, it is when you are first moving into this work, and if you haven't, like if you're at the starting point and you're just moving into the work, getting that relationship established with the funding community for this that can take a little bit of time. And again, we are we and others or other, neighborhood development CDCs that, that have relationships. And sometimes it's good to partner with those two. Okay. All right. Okay. So I love Jai, right? I want to make sure I'm saying your name correctly. I'm just opening up the chat here. So
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
I love that you're part of a farm. That's next on our list to really be working through how can we do cooperative, like urban farming. How can we hold green space for community? So I love it. In that instance, it might be a little easier.
With the first right of refusal, how have those businesses worked for residents and commercial and people with like commercial spaces?
All right, so our first right of refusal right now really is just, again, it's geared towards Rondo residents, even though, again, we work in all of Ramsey County, specifically for Rondo and our right to return work, and it's for phase 0.5 in that reparative kind of reparations framework right now. But we have community members that come to us who we know because we're part of the community. The great thing about growing up in the community myself is that you know everybody, right? So it's come on, and we have a selection process, and for those that are ready, and if we can support them and we have space for them, then we do it. We've got 2 businesses that are going into our space, going to open in the next 6 months here. So really excited about that. We're growing that work. And again, commercial for us is strategic acquisition. So we acquire land or land that's developable. We acquire land, we acquire actual businesses, and we are growing this particular model where we're going to actually just acquire a business that doesn't have brick and mortar, but acquire the actual business, and again revamp that and turn that back into a worker cooperative. If there are businesses that need transition again, or planning, they haven't had succession planning, and there's a way that we can actually make it work financially after we run all the numbers. It's again acquiring that into cooperative ownership, either helping those, if it's a business, it's working, and they have employees, like how can we help employees cooperatively own the business, or when we start doing more community kind of building, if there's a business that the community feels that it needs but not yet in the community, how can we go out and get that and cooperatively bring it back to the community? I mean, there's just so many ways that this work can be done. Anybody else, and when you're thinking about, who's thinking about like more of a like investment cooperative? Is that on the books? Is this all focused? Are you guys all focused primarily on cooperative housing? Just what are folks thinking about? Anyone interested in like cooperative businesses at all?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so Kita's looked into NICE to discuss their investment cooperative. We're currently working with an eSite group that is looking at purchasing or developing as a cooperative, this investment cooperative. And the land trust role in that would be either helping co-develop, bringing our expertise in development to that model, and again, purchasing the land, taking the land and keeping that in community control, while the cooperative, we help the cooperative develop at the same time to develop the land if that's what they want to do. Cool. Yes. I will share my my email address here for everyone. And then for those that are really wanting to do permanently affordable homeownership, let's get together. Let's figure out either connecting you with other land trusts. You can incubate within other community land trusts. You can help drive the mission, help drive, the things that you want to see in that community land trust, and so many ways that we can help. I would like to say that while we're 80% of AMI and below this year, we're really focusing on helping folks are 50% area median income and below. 66% of our homeowners this year were 50% under the 50% area median income. 33% of those were in between the 40 and 30% AMI range. And so, paired with the right investment, stacking the capital the right way, and getting savvy like that also can be done, because we're to really help people have permanent long-term housing. It's just, imperative that we help people understand how they can own at the same time too. Cool. All right. I have so excited.
All right. Thank you so much, Mikeya. I thank you also for sharing your email in the chat. Yeah, really exciting work happening out of Rondo, and according to Mayor Carter, some more exciting work happening too in the Rondo space. So yeah.
We are also, it's not 100% out there right now, but we are the Mayor's Inheritance Fund for the city of Rondo. Rondo Community Land Trust actually is going to help administer that program, and we're pairing it with so it's independent, but it's also can be paired with our right to return to Rondo work. And so we're really excited about that. This really is the first portion of how do we do reparations? What does that really look like? And I'm also in the political world, just making sure that I always call it our reparative framework. Some of our political folks don't like reparations, but whatever, just go on ahead. We gonna be repairing, giving back to, and making right those wrongs that have historically prevented us from being able to enter into the market. And I will leave it with this. I was asked what are our hopes for this work moving forward, is that we're able to actually to do that, to repair rights, to repair wrongs, to help people individually and communities collectively build their own economic ecosystem and wealth. And I want to be able to do that with community at scale. And along with that, we have an opportunity to not just, we kind of, like I feel we get there, we We create our own ecosystems, we do the work, and then somehow, somewhere, somebody, 94 comes through, or, urban renewal or policies. So the work really, that's part of the work, but we also need to protect it by involving ourselves in the political process, and ensuring that we get and keep what is deserved to us. If we can do that at scale, that would be amazing. All right.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And yeah, thanks for sharing space with us today. Definitely appreciated.
Thanks. Have a good day. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
All right, y'all. I'm not sure. I'm feeling a little bit of a low energy. Maybe it's from this morning. I'm not sure how y'all are feeling. But before we close out, we're gonna close out early today. Reclaim your time. But before we close out, we have been reading your evaluations. So just want to take note of that. Some things that we saw was asking for governance and bylaws. So we're also gonna send this out in an email, but just want to kind of keep you updated of like what's coming next. Also saw some things about some time to talk, so that's also coming for sure for the next session, and we'll keep that in mind for sessions to come. But just want to let you know that we're reading your evaluations. Thank you for taking time to fill those out. Those are really important to us. So let me just make sure that I have all the notes of the stuff. Okay, so an overview of what's coming next. So the next 2 weeks, so the 25th, we have our virtual cooperative tour. It's something that we always do around this month. It's like one of my favorite things that we do. Let's see. So we will have in the morning, so far that's confirmed, maybe my things might change around, hopefully not too much. I just had it pulled up and then it disappeared.
We'll have Elder Amake Kubat join us with Your Mama's House, Felicia Perry from Partnership and Property, Commercial Land Trust, and Tia Williams talking about Wilder Square Co-op in the morning.
And then in the afternoon, we'll have Angela Dawson from 40 Acre Co-op and Signe Harriday from the Fields at Root Spring. So hopefully that will give folks like some variety of the cooperative work from like an artist like Art of Mothering Co-op, Commercial Space Co-op, and ending the day with some like land farming, also more artist retreat space co-op. So yeah, hopefully that will give space for some variety. And for that day, we'll have the last portion of the day, we'll have some time for folks to like debrief and like discussion in breakout rooms. So something that was asked for in that evaluation. And then in March, beginning of March, we'll have our finance section. We'll be having the folks from Shared Capital Cooperative come back to talk about finance, as well as the Shared Ownership Center at Nexus come back to talk about finance, and we'll be refining some things to kind of include some questions that we heard in like the session where they came a few weeks ago. And then beginning of April, we'll have governance and bylaws. Working to confirm a lawyer that was working with the Sustainable Economies Law Center / EBREC right now. So we'll have that governance bylaws section. And is that it? Am I missing anything? Oh, and then we'll have our community engagement / democratic decision-making session / restorative transformative justice, transformative restorative justice section. And then that will be like kind of like our final closeout formal session before we have presentations and graduation. So that's kind of like what we're looking at between now and April in terms of sessions, which is coming up really fast. Every time I look at the calendar and we talk and we schedule out things, it's coming up really fast. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that in the chat. Also having a show in CETA February 20. Oh, that's exciting. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's what we have upcoming. We'll send those things out in the email too, just so everyone can take a look at it, because I see some people were hopped off the Zoom too. And then I'm gonna quiet down and pass it up over to Liana.
Thank you, Nicole. So, in just wanting to close and just honor, I don't know how the session was today, just offering maybe just some time to do a brief body scan, take some deep breaths, just something to kind of ground us out our day. So feel free to turn your camera on, off, do whatever you need to do. And then I'll pop the link to our evaluation and we can kind of close. So I'm going to turn my camera off, but I'll keep my mic on so you can hear me. So I just invite you to just notice the places in your body where you are maybe holding some extra tension or feeling any discomfort, and just to offer some touch to those places this time. So maybe starting at the roots, maybe at the soles of your feet, giving them a nice massage, just to kind of offer some comfort, or wherever else you'd like to start. And then just kind of moving up the body. If you're starting at your feet, just massaging, giving that tactile connection. And also maybe being mindful of how your breath is. Is it shallow? Is it deep? Just giving time to just kind of feel your way through your body, giving attention and love to those areas. Maybe if you're sitting, maybe take a moment to stand or find a comfortable position to be in. So right now we're just kind of giving ourselves a massage or whatever else feels good right now. Maybe moving up if you're not already there, your stomach and your back. And also tending to your fingertips, forearms, upper arms, all the way up to your shoulders, maybe giving a nice massage to either side. And working your way up, even your neck, by your back of your head. Working your way all the way up to the crown. Also the temples. And I invite us to all just take 3 deep breaths at our own pace. And I'm going to mute. All right. Thank you, everyone. Gonna just offer our evaluation in the chat, but don't worry about doing it now if that doesn't feel good. All right. If anyone has any maybe closing thoughts or reflections they want to share, just want to invite space for that if that's needed, but no pressure.